Great pleasure to introduce Moorina Bonini. And we didn't plan to have two finishing PhDs because you've just really submitted a few more weeks ago. But so we had Dr. Rimmer, now Dr. Bonini. So Moorina Bonini is a proud descendant of the Order family clan of Yulupna and the Order Wiradjuri Briggs McRae family. Moorina is an artist who works are informed by her experience as an Aboriginal and Italian woman. Her practices attempt to disrupt and critique the Eurocentric foundations that centralise Indigenous categorisation within Western institutions by unsettling the narrative placed upon Aboriginal people as a result of colonisation of Aboriginal Australia. Moorina's practice is based within Indigenous knowledge systems and brings this to the fore. You got to update your bio. It sort of says you're currently a PhD. You're still a PhD candidate, but you're sort of in that transition at Woolmanjeka Jimbal Indigenous Research Lab at Monash University. And as I said earlier this morning, her work is currently in the More Than a Tarrang Tree exhibition upstairs at Melbourne Museum, and also in Primavera this year in 2023, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Sydney, and also the other PhD component at Marta Gallery at Monash University. So, Moorina, stage is yours. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Just coordinate. Yawa, morning. Te Bandula Nyinya, hello, and how are you? I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the country in which I live and work on, being the sacred lands of the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people. I'd also like to acknowledge Auntie Caroline and thank you for your beautiful welcome. It's always so lovely to have you welcome us here on your beautiful country. I also like to recognise all of our other elders in the room with us today and recognise that we are gathering on the lands of the Wurundjeri and Bunurong, and they are the traditional custodians of this beautiful country. I'd also like to acknowledge my own ancestral connections to the lands, skies and waters of the Yoriora, Wiradjuri and Wurundjeri peoples, and I acknowledge and pay respects to Bunjil, the creator spirit, and Wa, the crow, and thank them for their guidance. Furthermore, I'd like to acknowledge all Indigenous people that are joining us here today. Oh, I'll go back. My name is Moorina Bonini, and I'm a Yoriora, Wiradjuri and Wurundjeri Winya, an Italian Winya. Winya is the Yoriora word for Aboriginal woman. I'm a PhD candidate in Marta at Monash University, and as Brian mentioned, part of the Woolmanjeka Jimbal Research Lab located on the Caulfield campus. Code switching, creating a space to align structural values, is my practice-led PhD. As mentioned, I have just submitted my PhD exegesis in September and currently have the practical components of my submission on show here at the Melbourne Museum in the exhibition More Than a Tarrang, Tree, Memory, Material and Cultural Agency, and also currently showing at the Marta Gallery at the Caulfield campus. In today's presentation, I'm going to discuss my research journey, and the research methodology Wanara active code switching, which I created and applied in my research. I got to get this green button right. But first, as always, it's important to position myself. My mum is Professor Julie Andrews, OAM, and she is an Aboriginal anthropologist and established academic and researcher at La Trobe University. My grandmother, Leah Andrews, was born on Cumragunja Aboriginal Reserve and is a descendant from the Briggs McRae family through her father, Selwyn Briggs, and the Doolan Yagan family clan of Yulupna through her mother, Geraldine Briggs AO, my great-grandparents. Through my matrilineal heritage, I'm also Wurundjeri Woiwurrung and Wiradjuri. My great-grandparents have many descendants. We're a big mob. Yoriora Waka. Waka is the Yoriora word for country. is located across what is now known as the New South Wales and Victorian state borders. The Dungala, the Yorta Yorta word for Murray River, runs through the heart of Yorta Yorta Waka. We are river people. The first photograph you can see here, located on the left, was taken on the bank of the Dungala, just a short walk away from the schoolhouse on Cumbreganga Aboriginal Reserve. I have a strong ancestral and Yakupna's family connection to Cumra, as many of my Yanbina ancestors and Yakupna were pushed onto Maloga mission under the control of the missionaries, and after this, they were then forced to go to the government reserve Cumbreganga. Although Cumra was a government reserve, it still remains to be a significant part of history and a significant place for my Yorta Yorta community and Yakupna. Cumra is situated on Yorta Yorta Waka along the Dungala. I have a deep relationship with my Waka, and I have travelled to this particular spot on the Dungala various times throughout my life. The second photograph in the middle is of the Bolan Bolan Billabong, which is part of Wurundjeri Willem country. The Bolan Bolan Billabong is located on Bulleen Road in Bulleen, behind the Veneto Italian Club. I grew up going to the Veneto Italian Club, which in turn brought me to the Bolan Bolan Billabong, and travelling to these two places have formed part of my cultural identity. The Billabong used to connect to the Yarra River, but now it sits by itself a short distance from the river. The Bolan Bolan Billabong is one of many sites of significance on Wurundjeri country. The third and final photograph was taken on the bank of the Murrumbidgee River on Wiradjuri country in February this year when I visited the Warringezda Aboriginal Mission, which is located near Darlington Point. My great-great-grandmother, Nanny Teresa Nee Middleton, met and married my great-great-grandfather, William Bill Clements, at Warringezda Aboriginal Mission. I'm also descended from a large Italian migrant family, and my father's family come from northern Italy, from the province of Udine, Latesana. It is important that I position myself at the beginning of this presentation, as it is an important cultural protocol in Aboriginal culture to do so, to introduce yourself via sharing your family name, your mob, and your waka. It is important also to pay homage to my Yanbina, who walk alongside me and my Yakupna, for their strength and storytelling, which has been instrumental in contributing to my journey. I pay respect to my Aboriginal elders and acknowledge that I am an extension and continuation of their strength and resistance. So a little bit of background. Here is a list of some Western institutions that we are all familiar with in some way, and as Indigenous peoples engaging Western institutions, we know deep down that the engagement will be challenging and laborious, as these Western spaces operate upon Eurocentric values. These Western ways of working sit in opposition to our own ways of working. As Indigenous people, those are our ways of knowing, being, and doing. Therefore, as Indigenous people navigating and working within Western institutions, we often find ourselves speaking directly into the colonial power dynamics that are evident in these Western spaces, whilst also seeking to hold such systems to account. As a Winya researcher and artist, the Western institutions in which I work and engage with are these institutions. And my research is driven by my lived experience working and existing specifically in these Western spaces. As Indigenous researchers, practitioners, and people, we must continue to challenge the ongoing cultural theft and appropriation that occurs within Australian Western institutions. In examining such locations through a critical lens and Indigenous methodological process, so I'm a bit nervous, I endeavoured to showcase how Western ontology is the foundation from which systemic racism and colonial dictatorship has and continues to stem from. Through Indigenous creative practice, methodology, and Indigenous research, my research considers whether and how the ways in which Western institutions currently operate can be transformed. Therefore, my research question for my PhD was, how can code switching and concept with practice-led research shift the ontology of Western institutional structures? Code switching is a linguistic construct or term created in 1977 by John Gumperz, and the term itself refers to a person's ability to switch between two languages at once. Through my research, I have combined code switching and practice to create Wanara active code switching. Wanara active code switching proposes onto-epistemological shifts and switches from the Eurocentric value system to a more deeply considered way of being aligned with Indigenous knowledge systems. Wanara active code switching is founded upon Arnie Mary Graham's Aboriginal relationality, meaning that as an Indigenous research methodology, it is located to and upon an Indigenous worldview and way of working. I envision the two systems I am part of as two Banmira rivers that run alongside each other, but there is land that runs between the two, separating them. The first Banmira, the river, is my journey as an Indigenous researcher in Western academia. The Banmira is not straight as it curves and bends, which presents the many things I encounter along the way. This is where I learn how to navigate colonial institutions, power dynamics, and learn how to protect myself as an Indigenous researcher and Winya, and the ways in which I use my writing and practice as ways to voice my experiences. The second Banmira is my journey as a Winya. The Banmira bends are similar to the Dungala, and part of the Banmira flows off into a billabong akin to the Bolan Bolan billabong. This is where I have been taught by my elders, my aunts, my uncles, and my mum about my Yoriora, Wurundjeri, and Wiradjuri culture. I continue to learn about my culture and my heritage through this journey. A Banmira, a river shaped and informed through the many stories about and from my community, my waka, and also the dreaming. From this place on land, in between the two, I can hear the flow of the Walla, the water, and I can see where the two Banmiras, the rivers, separate. Wanara code switching refers to my own experience of switching between Western knowledge systems and Indigenous knowledge systems. The switch is a physical, mental, and spiritual shift from one system to the other and vice versa. In its English translation, Wanara, a Yoriora word, means active, which I believe is fitting as the code switching undertaken throughout my research has been an active process guiding the research and the creative practice. Wanara code switching as a research methodology is reflective of the ways of working and learning in which I, as a Winya and researcher, practice every day. This methodology encompasses the ways I have always used to inquire about knowledge and stories. These are Nawu, to listen, Muramna, to look, and Bamanga, to feel. These are the ways in which I have learnt and will continue to learn from my elders, my community, Yakupna, and my country. My Dapalama between practice is an articulation of my Wanara code switching between these Indigenous knowledge systems and Western discourse. I argue that through my Dapalama practice, I can articulate the space between the material, the practice, the physical, and the immaterial knowledge presented through the manifestation of my own creative practice. Dapalama is the Yoriora word for between, and in choosing to use the Yoriora language word when referring to my own practice, locates the word Dapalama to Yoriora waka, country, and culture, and in doing so, eliminates separation between practice and knowledge. Through practice, I have realized that Dapalama is active in the sense that it is the immaterial space in which I exist between Western philosophy and Indigenous onto-epistemology, and between Indigenous knowledge systems and Western discourse. Dapalama practice offers various modes of cultural expressions that respond to the separation between Western ontology and Indigenous onto-epistemology. This is demonstrated through the examples of the cultural expressions that are created from the space between my bawu, my body, and the Western institution, and between my mark making and the gallery. These are practice examples of how Dapalama practice combats and addresses the separation within Western ontology and discourse. This is the significance of the Yoriora word Dapalama, and is why I have decided to use it for my PhD research. Dapalama is deeply linked with practice because it reveals the truth regarding Western ideology and its false relationship to reality. This falseness permeates through the psyche and work of people within so-called Australia as Western discourse continues to privilege Western modes of thinking over that of Indigenous knowledge and culture. The materialisation of my Wanara code switching is demonstrated through this work untitled bracketed ethnographic container. The displayed wooden museum boxes in this work were created to hold significant Indigenous Southeast culture material in the museum collection across the 1950s, the 1960s and 1970s that had been collected by anthropologists, ethnographers, farmers, regular people, and donated to Museums Victoria, or in some cases, acquired by the museum. I came across these museum boxes while undertaking a collection visit led by then Senior Curator of Southeastern Aboriginal Collections, Kimberly Moulton. Kimberly said that the museum was preparing to discard the collection boxes, which had not been in use for a number of years. Immediately, I understood that these boxes were significant and that I wanted to work with them. Kimberly coordinated for the boxes to be handed over to me following our conversation. It is important here to consider this moment while discussing this work, to ask whether anyone else in the museum would have coordinated and allowed for this exchange to have happened. This is why it is fundamental for Indigenous peoples to work within Western institutions, especially museums, to ensure these forms of cultural exchanges happen. These boxes sit atop Maloga, sand, which symbolises the waka, the country, from where our cultural materials have been collected or stolen. The boxes appear to be in a transient state, which conveys ideas of mobility regarding the cultural material contained within the boxes. Are the boxes full of cultural material? Are they on their way to a museum collection? Are they stuck in the Dapalama, the between? These are the questions that arise from the placement of these boxes. These wooden boxes are echoes of the violent acts of colonisation that occurred across our waka, our country, and our wala, our water, to which we as a people are still recovering and healing from today. The watha watha, the rope, has been woven using the historical weave style to bind gorowa, emu feathers, used for gorowa, emu feather necklaces or skirts. This same weaving technique was used to weave the watha watha, the rope, which has been threaded through eucalyptus branches, creating the boundary around the work. Indigenous cultural practices and knowledge are centred in this work that aims to acknowledge the dark history of historical overcollecting of Indigenous cultural materials. The burnt markings across the surface of the wooden boxes have been informed by my embodied cultural knowledge of mark making. The historical and significant cultural practice of yen match, to burn, is used to reposition the narrative regarding these colonial containers. Whilst burning these boxes, I came across original handwritten notes on the surface of the boxes that provided details about the cultural materials that were collected and then stored in these boxes. Some of the descriptions included no locality, unregged for unregistered, identification code such as R267, and an entire lid of one of the boxes that listed various English place names across the southeast. There were 2 boxes that had writing on them that indicated at some point in time they had held physical Yanbina, our ancestors. This was an indescribable moment for me as I came across these 2 boxes. And it was through my marking and burning across the surface of the remaining boxes that I was able to respond to these experiences. I sat for hours in deep conversation with these boxes, marking and burning them. In the presentation of this work, untitled Ethnographic Container, I pay homage to the Yanbina, the ancestors, that were disrespected, stolen, and then contained physically in these 2 boxes. There are 2 imprints on the surface of the Maloga, the sand, which is symbolic of the presence of these 2 boxes. These imprints reveal the truth regarding the history of these boxes and the Western institution. One of the significant things about this work is the title, Untitled Ethnographic Container. The word container was used throughout my written exegesis to refer to Western institutions which contain Indigenous knowledge, cultural practices, and materials. Western institutions are containers of separation. The work, untitled Ethnographic Container, brings the material out of the container physically through using the container, which are the wooden museum boxes. This is Wanara code switching, which sees me bring this separated together through the practice whilst also critiquing across all levels of the institution. However, the work itself is still contained because neither the work nor I can escape the structure and tropes of the museum. I learnt from the practice Yinmach to burn through listening and watching, and understood deep within my bawu, my body, the practice of my Yanbina, my ancestors. The markings have come from within, but have also been informed by the site visit to the Melbourne Museum collections, where I was able to look and hold cultural materials like shields, digging sticks, woven string, and baskets. From the time spent in the collection with these significant cultural materials that were from my own ancestral lands, and also from across the southeast region, I was able to connect with the various forms of markings. I saw the stories that were the marks, the references to waka, to bawu, and to cultural practice. Museums become factories of amnesia because they hide things away. However, this then creates a tenuous space for creativity to happen. By disrupting the container, I combat the dynamics of amnesia, which with these Western institutions perpetuate. Therefore, the space between the container, containment, and contained is dapalama, between. The significance of this work is the interaction between the museum boxes as objects and myself. I have taken the boxes out of the museum and I have transformed them through the material practice. It was through the practice of Yinmach to burn that I learnt through embodiment. The dapalama space, the between space of the lines on the boxes are significant because that space is knowledge. Through burning, I have realized that dapalama is active in the sense that it is the metaphysical space in which I exist between Western discourse and Indigenous onto-epistemology. I also strongly believe that through the practice of Yinmach to burn, that this transformed the Moorina, the spirit of these collection boxes. Yinmach to burn as a cultural practice was transformative. This is my dapalama practice. The mode of inquiry for my PhD research undertaken is practice-led research, which I believe enabled for a deeper and more critical examination of my research question. I also strongly believe that practice-led research is the most suitable approach of inquiry in relation to this particular research question, as it is one of the few research methods that can be linked to Indigenous practice. Western ontology is the essence of the dominant paradigm within the Western world. Therefore, the peoples living within the Western world are taught, instilled, and encouraged to practice the values of the West. This continues the perpetuation of colonial violence and governance over non-dominant value systems and knowledge, and essentially reinforces the Western narrative of power. The significance of my practice-led PhD is that it combines the immaterial, our knowledge, and material practice together through my dapalama practice, which then sees a real and major affect in the world, firstly with the maker, myself, and secondly with the viewer. This is the articulation of my Wanara code switching through my dapalama practice. The code in which I'm referring to when I say switching is the ontological positioning of a person, meaning when switching of codes occurs within a personal space, it is the occurrence of the transformation of ontology. And my practice, my dapalama practice, goes beyond the binary because making from an embodied position realigns. Therefore, the making itself realigns. I would like to finish today's presentation with a poem that I wrote to conclude my written exegesis. Bamanga, to feel with my hands, Baramna, to look with my eyes, Banyama, to make with my bawu, Anagram, to be a winya. Galina Niana, thank you.